Well, hello everybody and a warm welcome from Brisbane, Australia. I say that because we've got people from all over the world who are joining us. I just want to make sure that I can be heard, so we'll get the basics out of the way. Those of you who are online, if you could just indicate to me that you can hear me, that would be great. Over in the chat box you can just make a comment there which would indicate to me that you can hear me, because that's probably a good start in the whole process. Warm welcome to lots of you. There's over 100 people in this Lunch and Learn series, and that's pretty exciting. And just to think where learning and development's going these days, to consider that we can broadcast all over the world to all sorts of people. So warm welcome to those of you in the US. I'm not sure what time it is there, but I would imagine it's not lunchtime. Warm welcome to those in the Philippines from ShareSource. So there's two of you involved in this, so thank you for your involvement. A warm welcome to the New Zealanders across the ditch, and we've got industries all across the board. So welcome to the West Australian Symphony Orchestra. I have very fond memories of that orchestra, and I think it's one of the finest orchestras in the country, and thank you for your involvement today. West Farmers as well, warm welcome. We've got lots of people from that organisation. We've got startup IT firms. We've got Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. We've got Queensland Police. We've got warm welcome to Central Highlands Regional Council. So guys, welcome, and I'm really looking forward to working with you over the next 6 modules, or 6 units as I think I've called them, and we're starting off today talking about feedback. So let's get underway, and just a couple of things that are important here. Because we've got so many people online, it's not really possible for me just to allow people to talk at any time. So if and when you've got questions, and I hope you do have them, the idea is if you look over on the right-hand side, you'll see a little box, a question box. Just type in your question right there, and what'll happen is that I'll pause throughout the next hour and I'll basically deal with those questions. So, but type them in when you think about them, because otherwise you might forget them, and we don't want to leave them all to the end if possible. So that would be very, very useful, and I will certainly deal with those. If we come offline and you think, oh, I'd love to have asked Tim a question, I didn't get around to it, you can send me an email, and I'm more than happy to answer it that way as well. Speaking of emails, I will be sending you an email at the end of this, and in that email I'll be giving you a link to Unit 2. I'll be giving you a copy of the recording, and I'll be giving you a copy of the slides. So you'll have lots of useful information that you'll get from me just by registering for this particular unit. All right, so let's move right along. I'm just going to go to the first slide, which essentially is just showing us the program. And you might say, well, you know, why have you chosen these 6 topics? I wanted to make this as practical as I possibly could, in the sense that all of these things that we've got up here that you can see in front of you are practical leadership or supervisory skills, and that's the one thing we've all got in common today. Look, you could argue there should be other things on the list. You could argue that some of these things are more important than others, but I just know from experience that if we cover all of these things, we're probably in a pretty good space in terms of being able to lead and manage people. So we're going to talk obviously about feedback today. And then in Unit 2 or Module 2, I'm going to refer to influencing, you know, improving your personal influencing capabilities. Because at the end of the day, all of us are in the business of influencing, whether we like to think about it that way or not. Probably all of you are leading teams, and that's what we'll get to in the third one, where we're looking at optimizing team performance. How do you get the very best out of people? It's a pretty elusive topic, but at the end of the day, getting the best out of other people is probably one of our primary roles. And how do we actually understand people and their personalities? We've all had personality clashes, and we will continue to do so. And often it's because people are looking at the world differently the way you are. So we'll have a look at that. And we will also talk about how to facilitate effective meetings. Our whole life is a meeting. You could argue this is a meeting, and after this is over, you'll be on to a next meeting. And so just being good at running meetings is extremely important. So we'll have a look at that as well. So that's the process. That's the program we're looking at, and I'm hoping that you enjoy it very much. So let's get underway. So what I'm putting up here on the screen is taking a little while to come up on your screen by the look of it, but there we go. What we're looking at here is just a little bit of research from Deloitte's, and what this research is actually demonstrating is some interesting things about feedback, because essentially that's what we're going to be talking about today. So if you have a look up at the top bar, you'll notice that the blue, of course, is engaged employees, and that's, of course, what we all want. And when people give or receive, I should say, when people receive strength-based feedback, that is, feedback based on their capabilities, their innate talents and their abilities, they tend to be more engaged. In fact, overwhelmingly, they're more engaged. The second bar says, and this is where it gets very interesting, the second bar says when we receive critical feedback, right? So people would call that perhaps negative feedback. There's still a high level of engagement and, of course, disengagement as well. But look at the bottom bar, and this is the critically important part that I want to emphasize, that when people receive no feedback, we can be assured that they will be disengaged. All right, so there's a very clear message in this, and the message is pretty straightforward, and that is we need to be giving people regular feedback, positive, negative, whatever. And if we don't, we're actually going to create the environment by which people will ultimately become disengaged. So I think that's a really important starting point before we go any further. So the moral of the story: give feedback, whether it's positive or negative. I might also say the other thing that will happen in these short, sharp sessions is we finish with a bit of homework. So what I do is I actually give you some things that I'd like you to try. And you know what's great about this? You can do it straight after lunch. If it is lunchtime wherever you are, wherever it is, you can put these things into practice immediately. All right. So let's look at some other interesting statistics. And the first bit of statistic, or the first statistic I'd like you to have, or basically the first bit of data I'd like you to look at, is roughly by a 3-to-1 margin, employees believe that constructive feedback does more to improve their performance than positive feedback. Now, isn't that interesting? So basically people are saying that as long as it's genuine, as long as it's meant in the right way, and as long as it's tactfully put, and that's essentially what we're going to be covering today, then people are likely to respond well to that. Because I think there's a bit of a myth that we kind of let sleeping dogs lie, or we don't want to open a can of worms. So what we do is we don't say anything. And ultimately what happens is that we create a disengaged workforce just by the fact that we're not saying anything, even though we think we're actually doing what we think might be the right thing. So that's interesting. And I think this is an interesting point as well. And the secret of having employees listen to your feedback is whether or not they respect you. Now, ultimately, if you're not respected, then it wouldn't matter how good the feedback was, how appropriate it was, when it was given, who it was given to, it will fall on deaf ears. So there's a high correlation between respect and feedback. So therefore, being in the business of being respected is critically important. However, on the flip side of that, those that don't give feedback are often not respected. So respect is critically important, and we will talk more about that as the program goes on. Another point here is you could have exactly the same thing said to two different people and get two different responses. Basically, one respects you and one doesn't. And that's critically important. So let's be clear about this. It's not always the words that you use or the phrases or whatever. It's pretty much how the other person perceives you. So there is another part to all this, and that is about respect. And that's critically important. Okay. Here are some more statistics that might be important to you. And this is really around the performance review. And for some of you in this broadcast, you would be aware that I'm not a great believer in performance reviews. In fact, I wrote a book on it called The End of the Performance Review. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be giving people feedback. I just don't think it's the right place to be doing it at a performance review. But look, we won't go down that road. Otherwise, I might just go completely off the rails. So let's have a look at a couple of figures. From the Psychological Bulletin, 30% of performance reviews end up decreasing employee performance. There you go. I have yet to see any evidence of performance reviews increasing performance. But here we go, 30% are saying that it decreases, not increases. 58% of executives believe their current programs don't result in performance or engagement. So that's a bit disturbing, isn't it? 70% of companies are now reconsidering their performance strategy. So there's a lot of turmoil out there in terms of thinking about how we look at performance, and I've written a few books in this area. 2 out of 3 of employees with high performance scores aren't actually the highest performers. So that basically means that we're not necessarily giving people the right ratings. And I find that people will often give people high ratings when they don't necessarily mean it, and so forth. So that's a bit of an issue. 6% of companies surveyed think performance reviews are a waste of time. Right, so that's a fair minority. 2% of HR executives say annual evaluations are useless. 80% of workers are dissatisfied with performance reviews. So we're getting a few messages here about the performance review. I think that the critically important component of leading is actually giving regular dialogue given to people constantly, which is essentially what we're talking about, aren't we, as far as feedback's concerned. So there's some very sobering statistics and things that you might like to ponder. Now, what I'd like you to consider is, I'm going to run through a couple of questions, and really I want you to ask yourself the question, am I doing this? Because at the end of the day, if you're not doing any of these, in other words, if you can't answer positively to these questions, then you're not creating the right environment for feedback. So let me run through them with you. So, are you very clear about your expectations as a leader? Forget about communicating it. Are you very clear about where the line is in the sand? Do you know what you expect of your people? That's the first step. It's really important to get that absolutely clear in your head. Do you know where that line is? That's the first. And of course, if you can't answer yes to that, then it's pretty hard to give feedback, isn't it? So you have to get that one right. So have a good hard think about what you expect of people. Once you have worked out what it is that you expect from people, the next question you've got to ask yourself is, have I communicated these expectations to my team? Now, that's an important question, and some of you, I know in this broadcast, would say to me, if I was talking to you one-on-one, oh yes, I do that regularly. But if I went and talked to some of your people in your team, they would probably suggest to me that you don't. So it's really, really important for you to communicate what you expect. Now you can do this a number of ways. You can do this one-on-one. You can do this in a team meeting to a certain extent. But it's just important to let people know where the line in the sand is, because obviously if they don't know it, they're not mind readers, so they're going to have a lot of trouble meeting your expectations if you haven't communicated it to them. I guess another question you've got to ask yourself is not only have I communicated it, but do my team actually understand what I expect of them? Now that's pretty important, isn't it? So it's one thing to communicate it, but do they actually understand it? So how do we know that? Well, check. Ask people. Is it clear what I'm asking you to do? Do you have any questions about what I'm asking you to do? All right, so that's important. People need to know not only what your expectations are, but they need to understand what those expectations are as well. Now, this one is a very interesting one that we often take for granted. And this is a very interesting issue. Do your team members do they accept your expectations? So it's one thing hearing it, it's another thing understanding it, it's another thing accepting it, isn't it? Because obviously if people don't accept it or think it's too ridiculous or not something that they need to worry about, well, they're clearly not going to do it. They'll put it in the too hard basket. So it's often a good idea to actually say to people, is it clear what I'm asking? Can I get your commitment? So there's nothing wrong with asking that, by the way, and it's a good thing to do. Don't assume that you're going to get it. That's the important thing. All right. Are your team members, so that should be committed, are my team members committed? So it's one thing to accept it, another thing to commit to it. Commit means to continually perform at a certain level. So that's really important. So you can see there's a great deal of complexity, isn't there, around communicating standards. Do your team members know what they are performing, how they're performing against those expectations? All right, so, okay, I understand what it's about. I get your expectation. I'm willing to commit to it, and I don't know whether I'm actually achieving it or not because I haven't heard anything from you. So this is, of course, where feedback comes in. So are you actually supporting your team members to achieve those expectations? So if you're giving unrealistic deadlines or you are asking people to do things that are beyond their skill set, or if you're giving people information where they're confused about their priorities, then obviously they're not going to meet those expectations. So sometimes it's worth looking and even asking the question, saying, how can I support you better to meet these expectations? Because it's really important that you do. So that's another really, really important question. So just going back to that list, there are some critically important questions you need to ask yourself. Now this might seem all very overwhelming, and you might say, well, wow, there's a lot involved in this. Yes, there is. But if you're communicating clearly, you're getting feedback, you're doing it persistently and consistently, you're giving feedback, you're asking people how you can support them, then you're probably likely to be answering all these questions in a positive. All right? So that's the checklist that's really important. So what are some attributes that are critically important now to giving really good, positive, not so much positive, but really constructive feedback? These are not necessarily in order, and you might say, well, what's the most important to the least? They're all important, basically, and if you're missing any of these attributes, trust me, your feedback is not going to be as effective as you might like it to be. And there are a whole lot of other variables such as respect that I've covered already. But look, let's take one, timing. As a general rule, what is important here is basically to give feedback as quickly as possible after a particular event. And interestingly enough, that's positive and negative. Now, I know that's not quite as easy as you might think, because you're busy. You notice something. You've got to get this email out. So I just haven't got time to be sort of giving people positive feedback, or I can't actually pull them up about that behaviour. The faster you give the feedback after the event, the more effective it's likely to be. Why? Because the other person is absolutely aware that this is a priority for you. Why? Because you've downed tools to give feedback. And can you just imagine what would happen if you said to somebody, oh, look, I didn't get a chance to say this to you 4 weeks ago, but I really wanted to say to you, you did a fantastic job on that project. Well, look, I guess that's better than nothing, but the other person's probably thinking to themselves, well, if it was really that great, I wonder why they couldn't find the time to have told me that at the time when they read the report. Okay? Or in a performance review, you might say, well, look, I remember 4 months ago you were going through, you were being quite negative in our team meetings, and I didn't really pull you up then, but I feel an obligation to say that, I didn't think that attitude was ideal. Well, the other person's probably thinking, well, that was 4 months ago, I'm in the here and now, so they're probably likely not to listen too much to that. So timing's critical. I've got a couple of questions here, guys. Thank you for typing them. That's the whole point. So let's see what we've got. Good. Some people can hear me. I'm glad. Thank you. Good. Lots of people can hear me. Good, good. There was a question here. Tim, do you have any suggestions re how you engage and facilitate a team member committed to your expectations? Yes. First of all, and thank you, Ellen, for that question. I think first of all, the key thing is, how do you know they're not engaged? Is it something you're observing? Are they not meeting the deadlines? You really need to have a conversation with them, Ellen, and you need to actually basically say, look, I explained this expectation to you last week, you might recall. You did give me your commitment that you would try to achieve it, so I'm just curious to know what's gone wrong, because what I observed wasn't what actually should have happened. What do you think about that? So I think part of it is actually having the conversation, and I think if you do a lot of the things that I mentioned before, you will engage. And if you don't, you have a conversation and say, what is it about these expectations that you find difficult, or what sort of support do you need from me that you're not currently getting? Whatever it requires. But ultimately the answer, Ellen, to your question is really around the conversation. Okay? So you've got to have that conversation. Sometimes that's the elephant in the room. People aren't achieving. You wonder why. You speculate. Have the conversation with them. It's really important to do that. So timing's very important. The other important thing, thank you for the question, the other important thing about feedback is to be very specific. It's no good saying to someone, look, the way you contributed in that team meeting was awful. Well, in your mind it probably was awful, but the truth of the matter is it wasn't terribly specific. The other person probably doesn't know what you're talking about because it's not specific. Now, if you'd said something like this, I noticed you made 3 contributions in the team meeting, and each of those contributions was basically putting down the ideas of one of your colleagues. And I'm not sure that really, well, I'm pretty sure that didn't lead to a positive environment in the team meeting. That's a much better way of going, all right? Because you want people to focus on the specifics. And so have a think, take a deep breath, think about how you're going to communicate that, and then communicate it. And you'll get really good results. And you'll feel better about yourself for doing it that way too. All right, we've got another question here by the look of it. Tim, got any suggestions of how we deliver these expectation messages in a one-on-one situation or to a group? Yeah, thanks, Justin. Look, I think that there's no substitute for one-on-one, frankly, and I'll go through some of this with you, Justin, as we finish the rest of the webinar. I'll talk about some ways of broaching subjects, but at the end of the day, just calmly explain to people what you expect of them, ask their commitment, and hopefully you get a nod or a grunt or something back. Because if you get a nod or a grunt or something back, they've actually at least committed to it, and you can hold them accountable for that. So I think that's really important. I think sometimes we just assume that people are going to accept your expectations. So that's important. From a team point of view, Justin, I think it's just important to put it out there, pause at the end and just say, look, is there any issues with that? Can I ask for your support? And just look around the room, make eye contact with the group. It's not quite as effective, of course, as the one-on-one because everyone can hide in the group. So be specific. It's really important to do that. Here is a little example. So thanks, Justin, for the question. So keep those coming in. Overall, look at this feedback. Overall, good job on the presentation to this morning's meeting, but it could have been better. All right, well, that's feedback. How could you have said that better? This is so vague. What was wrong with it? Well, plus just because you didn't like it doesn't necessarily mean it was bad. So how could it have been better? So the idea is to kind of discuss what could be done differently. So what about something like this? Great job on the presentation. I really liked how you used statistics to back up your key points in front of our clients. One small comment. Maybe next time you could invite more comments from our clients or the group to get them more involved. You see the difference? Now, there's no great skill in putting those words together. You just have to think, how do I get this across in a very specific way? So yes, you do need to have a think about it, but at the end of the day, that's not terribly, I don't think that's rocket science. It's you just got to think that through. And if you make a mistake, the other thing I'd say to you is just go back and say, look, I apologise. I probably wasn't as clear as I would have liked to have been when I gave you that feedback. So I'd like to have another go at it and then try it again. Now, this is a big one. Frequency. We need to be giving regular feedback over and over and over and over again. It never ends. You never arrive. It must happen daily, weekly, monthly, project by project, meeting by meeting, situation by situation, hallway by hallway, corridor by corridor, water cooler by water cooler. It never ends. You might say, I don't have time for all this. Well, at the end of the day, this is your role. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't need to take long, but it needs to be regular. And I think this is one of my reasons that I find that the performance review is a big problem, because we save it all up for the performance review, the big event. And for 6 months, we've said nothing. And all of a sudden, we offload. Not good. Doesn't do much to, it doesn't do anything really. So, Kate, you're just making a comment here, and I'm just going to go to that. Much of the way feedback needs to be delivered seems to come down to emotional intelligence. Can this be developed? Nice comment, Kate. Yes, the evidence shows that emotional intelligence is something that can be worked upon, and I think all of you need to make, it's never something you arrive at. Interesting enough, now with the concepts of neuroplasticity and some of the work done on the brain, there's now clear evidence that your brain is constantly changing and creating neural pathways. And for people now to say I'm too old to learn or whatever is absolute nonsense. It's a myth. So we're continually learning, even to the point that there is now some view that IQ can be changed. A lot of people said, oh, whatever your IQ is your IQ. So there is evidence that's there that the brain can change shape, create new neural pathways. So the answer to your question is yes, and the premise in your question is correct. Emotional intelligence is part of the deal, absolutely. Right, now that is pretty much all of us in this broadcast today, are probably have learnt to be pretty good at answering questions. You go and do a degree, you go and do a trade, you're basically learning how to answer questions. That's what you're doing. And then all of a sudden someone throws you into a leadership position and they say, well, now you're supposed to be asking questions. It's very difficult to make the adjustment. I understand that. But my strong advice, in coming back to Kate's excellent comment and observation, it's really important to learn to ask really good questions. Why, what, when, who, where, how, and which. Don't be afraid to go there. And in fact, even to the point of saying to people, what do you think about that particular presentation or the report you wrote or the way you managed that client? Get them to give you feedback before you jump in and give your feedback. So there's only three possibilities in that example. You agree with them, which case you can then say, I agree with you, and then add something to that. You disagree with them, you can say, well, I have a different point of view. This is what I think. Or it's not really clear what they're on about, in which case you can say, look, do you mind elaborating, please? Or why did you say that? Please get good at asking questions. It is critically important. And I know some people feel as if they're kind of acting like a detective in these examples, when they're asking a lot of questions. Look, the best question you can ask people is to say, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions, just so that I can understand where you're at? No one's going to say no to that. And that opens up a doorway to you asking a bunch of questions. So ask lots and lots of questions, because actually, ironically, the person that asks the most questions in the conversation has the greater amount of control, because you're driving the agenda, if you think about it. Now, I think feedback should be done privately. Now, I'm not just talking about negative feedback, I'm talking actually about positive feedback as well. Some people actually get quite embarrassed if you single them out. People who may be introverted, they may not want to be the centre of the attention. So, I wouldn't take that risk. I would just walk up to that person quietly and in private and just say, job well done. Well, I'm really pleased with the way you got that done under all the time pressures that you had in front of you. Thank you. That's all you have to do. You don't need to have a big staff meeting and embarrass them in front of everybody else. It's just not a good way to go. Okay, let's have a look here. We've got another question. Yes, it can be developed. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions to assist getting any feedback? I'm assuming that's from other people. Look, the best thing to do there, frankly, is just to ask, what do they think, by asking questions. And you know what? Don't say anything. Just sit back in your chair, you're sitting down, and just wait. I can assure you, if you wait, something will happen. But often what happens is the tension rises because nothing's happening. So we actually go and answer our own question, and that's not good. So just sit there quietly, confidently, relaxed, just wait for the feedback. It'll come. And then when you only get a bit of it, you ask, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Can you tell me a bit more? So that's the answer to that one. And moving right along, use critical incidents to make your point. So the whole purpose of examples in the workplace, which is essentially what a critical incident is to add some validity. So basically just say, look, the other day, do you remember when you were talking to that customer and you said this? Do you remember that? Yeah, I do. Okay, let me give you some feedback, if I may, about that, if I may. Well, first of all, before I do that, how do you think it went? So it's a critical incident, and it can be a positive critical incident. That becomes critically important. All right, so let's now talk about the difficult conversations, because I know many of you are sitting there thinking, yep, I can handle the good ones. I don't really like these difficult ones, so I don't want to go there. Just a couple of key things that will work for you. I know they work because I've tried them myself and I've coached a lot of people in them. So let's have a look at some of these things that might work for you. Okay, now when you have to give somebody some feedback on poor performance, I think the first thing is get to the point. There's no point in having a bit of chit-chat. I mean, you've called the person away. There's no good having some small talk. They're probably very curious about what you want to talk about, so they don't want to be, you're not breaking any ice. Just get straight to the point. Just say, look, the reason I wanted to have a talk to you was the way you managed that situation in the office that happened 15 minutes ago. Right? Just get straight to the point. So that's important. Explain the purpose of the meeting. It's very important to do that. They're sitting there anxiously wondering, why am I being dragged away? What's going on? They're anxious, and their anxiety will increase the longer you leave it. Get straight to the point and explain the purpose. The purpose of this meeting is to talk to you about that incident that occurred 15 minutes ago when you were talking to so-and-so in the lunchroom. All right, just get straight to the point. Just really important to do that. Righto, thirdly, now after you've explained the purpose of the meeting, have a break, right? You don't have to say too much more. You just defer back to the person and just say, do you have a perspective on that? Is there something you'd like to tell me about that? Or do you, what was your impression about that? Were you happy with that performance? I'd like to hear your take on it. And then just sit back and allow the person to speak. And guess what? The longer they speak, the better. Get them to talk about it. That gets you off the hook. You just listen, don't interrupt. That's really important. And just let them talk. Really important. You want them engaged in this conversation. And I know they're going to say something provocative, and I know they're going to say something that's not 100% accurate, and I know they're wrong, but you aren't to interrupt them, okay? You must bite your tongue until it bleeds. Just let it go. At the end of their, when they draw breath, you can then say, look, there are a couple of things that you mentioned there that I'd just like to respond to. You see? Now, that's courteous, that's respectful, and frankly, if they interrupt you, can you not say, look, I've just given you an opportunity without interrupting, I'd appreciate the same opportunity, you see? So that's pretty important. I know it's very hard, particularly when people are dangling a piece of bait in front of you. Just don't bite, okay? Really important. Here are some other things you need to think about. And keep those questions rolling, guys. All right, so don't be shy, just type them in as soon as you think of them, or even comments, of course. So look, avoid confrontation. This feedback, difficult feedback albeit, is not an argument, right? This is not you Now, it might turn into an argument, but it can only turn into an argument if you decide to argue. Have you ever thought about that? So if you decide not to argue, it can't be an argument. It's just somebody perhaps raising their voice. That's not an argument. That's just somebody who can't handle, as they say in the movie, can't handle the truth. All right? So just say to the other person, I don't want to argue with you about this. This is not the point. I really just want to talk about this. All right? Just don't go there. Or, last case, last resort, let's agree to disagree. That's often a good way of defusing something, because at the end of the day, you want to move on. You can't just sit there for an hour, arguing. It's not going to help anybody. Focus on performance, not the person. Talk about the incident. Talk about your expectations. And really, really important to keep bringing it back to performance and not the person. All right? So don't get dragged into a personality assassination, or you just don't go there. So you need a bit of self-control, and I think Kate mentioned this earlier about the whole notion of emotional intelligence. You have to keep your cool. I understand that, but play it as a game. Just say, I'm going to really see if I can stick to my guns here and be calm, cool, and collected. Turn it into a bit of a competition for yourself. Righto. Thirdly, I think I mentioned this before. Focus on the future. This is all about remedying what happened in the past to improve the performance in the future. So, start to, and you know what? It's likely that this opportunity will happen in the future for them to remedy their performance. No doubt. So that's obviously where the focus is. It's about trying to remedy the performance for the future. So keep gently steering and firmly steering the conversation through to the critically important thing, which is the performance in the future. Extremely important. You just don't want to be bogged down in the past. Okay. Now, I think you need to balance all this up a bit. So be prepared to talk about their strengths as well as their weaknesses. And probably some of you sitting there saying, well, you know what? If you knew the person I knew, there's not a lot there. You've got to find something, right? Even if it's something like, I'm pretty confident that we can rectify this, right? Which is showing confidence in the other person. Because obviously if you weren't confident you could rectify it, why would you be bothering to give the feedback? So that's the worst possible case scenario in emphasizing strengths. In other words, leave something for the person, all right? But, if you get a chance to talk about their innate talents, go for it. But, try and balance it, because at the end of the day, it's important to keep that balanced. All right, I've got another comment or question here from Paul. Are there better times to conduct this kind of feedback? Early in the day, end of the day, end of the week? Is it bad to do it last thing on Friday? Great question, Paul. But my comment is any time. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're sort of wanting to sort of wait until the end of the day, or I'll deal with this when the person's in a better mood or whatever, it's probably not, it's probably more a commentary about what you're doing than anything else. Look, there's no perfect thing, and I know that you're talking about negative feedback here. Look, just get it out there. I actually think, from your perspective, first thing in the morning's ideal, because you're probably going to be thinking about it all day. Just get it off your plate. You've probably got a little bit more energy. You've had the first couple of cups of coffee. You might as well just do it then. Now, you might say, oh, yeah, but the other person might be sort of not their best for the rest of the day. Well, they may not be. But if you did it at the end of the day, they might come to work the next day in a grumpy mood. So there's no perfect time in that sense. Just do it. I think that's the important thing. Just do it, as Nike says. So thanks, Paul. Whoops, I went too far there. Let me go back one. And another key point is seek out the causes. Now, I often think that what we do in these situations, and particularly in complicated situations, what we do is we kind of make an assumption about what happened. And sometimes our assumption isn't correct. So, for example, if somebody has taken a long time to get some information to someone else when they promised to get it on at the close of business today, Friday, and they've taken too long to do it, you can assume that they just didn't see it as a priority. But when you scratch the surface, you might actually find out that, hang on a minute, there's more to it than that. They actually didn't receive the information that they needed in order to convey the full picture to the person that they needed to. In other words, they didn't have all the information they needed because there was an internal stakeholder or somebody who didn't give them what they needed. And you didn't know that until you actually found out. So sometimes it's really good, and in fact all the time it's good, just say, what happened? Tell me, why this occurred, because I don't want to jump to conclusions here until I've got the full picture. Again, what are you doing? You're showing basically a lot of respect for the individual by not jumping down to, we've all had people that have made assumptions about us, and it's kind of very deflating, isn't it, when people assume something when in actual fact they don't know the full picture. And you may not know the full picture, so please find out what the full picture is. Just say, look, just so I understand the circumstances, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? So there's a question. Say, look, what happened? When did it happen? Why did it happen? Who was involved? When did it take place? This is for more complicated things, of course. And what you'll find is that you're going to have a good conversation around that. You'll be in a much better position then to start talking about how you might remedy that for the future. And the other person will respect you more because you've gone to the trouble of engaging with them in the process rather than just jumping down their throat and saying, look, this is not on. There was a deadline, we agreed on it, you didn't perform, not happy. And of course, they're thinking in the back of their mind, yeah, but you don't know the full story. So they haven't even listened to you. They've listened to enough of it to be angry, but they haven't listened to the whole bit. So, and sometimes people don't necessarily have the confidence to say to you, now just a minute, Fred, just a minute, Mary, understand this. There were some mitigating factors. Now, I know this opens up a whole Pandora's box around making excuses. I get that. But one of the things you can do to interrogate an excuse is to actually say to the other person, tell me, is there anything you could have done to prevent that from happening? Really, really powerful question. Is there anything that you could have done on reflection that would have prevented that from happening? Now, there's only 3 answers to that. Yes, no, don't know. If it's yes, then you can say, well, that's a great opportunity that I'm sure won't be missed next time. Or if it's no, then say, well, let's just focus on the barriers around the performance that you were able to control. And if it's don't know, you can say, well, look, let's have a chat about it. Let's talk about it. Let's see whether there is anything that we could have done about it. You see, so that becomes critically important. All right, we've got another question from Bart from the Philippines. Is it possible to ask too many questions at the start of a conversation? Look, it depends, Bart, on what it is. If it's a very complex thing and you really have to get to the bottom of it, then asking a bunch of questions is absolutely critical. And as I said to you before, if you feel it's going to help, then actually ask the other person for permission. And as I said before, it's a great question. In other words, you could say, look, just so that I'm completely across this, do you mind if I ask a couple of questions so that I completely understand the circumstances? They're going to say yes, and you fire away, and till you understand it. So in that sense, it's courtesy to ask a bunch of questions to understand it. Don't worry that you might seem as if you don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes I actually find that it's good to say to people, look, it might seem like a really silly question, but when did this happen? So, because I know one of the reasons we don't ask a lot of questions is we're worried that the other person might think we're dumb or stupid or, so just say, oh, look, I don't want to seem silly, but can you tell me when it happened? And that way it sort of lets you off the hook a bit. So thanks, Bart. Moving right along. Now, guys, we're coming to the end. Now, this is the old rubber meets the road. I am always going to end these lunch and learn units by giving you some homework. And the homework is not going to be terribly onerous. It's going to be very practical. And here's the homework. The homework is this. I want you to make a commitment to give feedback 3 times a day for the next week. Now, if you're not used to giving feedback, that's going to be a pretty massive challenge. But I'm going to challenge you. And then what I want you to do is when we're back during Unit 2, I want to hear your war stories. In fact, I want you to email me and tell me what happened. Did it work? How did the person look? Did they have a bewildered look on their face? In other words, it could be an indication they had never received any feedback from you ever. How did they receive it? What happened? How did you broach it? Could you have broached it better? Could you have broached it differently? Were you happy with that? Okay, so that's the homework. Now you might say, well, how am I going to remember all that? Well, look, a couple of key things. If you're working in an office, just put a little notice somewhere on your computer with one of those sticky notes that we've got and just say feedback 3 times 3, feedback times 3, and whack it up somewhere so that people can whack it up somewhere so that people will you will see it. You don't want them to see it, but you want to see it, right? So that will work really, really well for you. And then just commit every single day. That's basically, we're talking about 15 bits of feedback over the course of a week. You will be quite surprised and pleasantly surprised at the difference that will make to you and to the other people. Okay, so that's the homework. Obviously if we don't do anything differently in these Lunch and Learn series, nothing is actually going to happen. All right, so I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions because now's your chance, guys. We're coming towards the end. That's the homework, and it's really important to challenge yourself. Now, if you drop the ball one day and say, oh, I could only do 1, don't beat up on yourself. Just get back in there and do it again. Do 3 next day. Don't panic about it. Just do it. And when I say feedback, I'm talking about positive and negative. So look, like if feedback could be as simple as just saying, look, Bill, Mary, thank you. I found the work that you did really helpful. Thank you. That's feedback. That's how long did that take? That's all it is. And then, you can actually go to your little post-it note and put a cross next to it and say, that's 1, 2 to go. And you just go through the rest of the day. That would be the way I would do that. All right. Another question from Bart again. Is this feedback in both public and private? But my feeling, as I said earlier, is that I think the feedback should be done in private. Okay? Because some people are just embarrassed about feedback, positive and negative, by the way. So it's probably better just to do it in private. Just say, look, can we have a word? And then, go go outside or take them into a room or something and just say, look, I just want to say thank you, or look, the incident that occurred there, I want to have a talk to you about it. What did you think of the incident? And then just hear what they have to say and then launch into some of the principles that I've talked about. They shouldn't, this feedback shouldn't take you a long time. So my feeling is do it in, I know there's a lot of books that say, you know, praise in public, criticise in private. My view is, you know, just respect people. Not everyone likes to be made the centre of attention. That's the truth of it. So you just better not go there if you need not go there. So that becomes really important. So thanks, Bart, again for your contribution. I just want to wrap up now, just to come back to the particular program that we're doing. Next month, you'll notice, is exactly a month away, and that will be going through the influencing. I want you to do a influencing diagnostic, which I'll send out to you this afternoon or after this at least, which I want you to complete. Now, you've got two versions of this that become really important. Now, for the cost that you've paid for this, you can do the paper and pencil version, or if you want to pay an additional cost, and I'll put all this in the email, which will give you a 13-page comprehensive report plus graphs and all the sort of information that you need, you can pay an additional fee. All right, now it's not going to be a hugely expensive exercise, but you might like to do that because it can be really powerful. So if you're really interested in learning how to improve your influencing capabilities, you might like to do the online version. So I'll leave that with you, and you might like to think that through. I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions there. Doesn't look like it. I might have missed some. You might have some at the end. You know where to get hold of me. Send me an email. So guys, thank you. I've enjoyed our first session. I hope it was all clear. You've got some homework. You've got some challenges to go through. I've appreciated the opportunity to work with you. So challenge yourself, do your homework, feedback to me. I love feedback myself, so you've got an opportunity to give feedback. So guys, thank you. And thank you for the feedback. I think it might be Katrina. Thank you. Very insightful, interesting session. Thank you. I appreciate that. So guys, thanks. All the very best. And